in terms of my background, it started with my master's degree in Sheffield, where I was focusing on biomedical engineering generally. And I got very lucky and was put into contact with Luca Gould, the coordinator. He had a really interesting PhD focusing on the spine, a slightly different topic to the one METASTRA is addressing, but nonetheless, that was the project. I got involved with that, finished my PhD more or less as METASTRA started. And it was at this point I was thinking what I wanted to do next. Did I want to continue research? Did I want to stay connected to the academic world? Did I want to go into industry? And as METASTRA was starting, just as I was finishing, they also happened to be looking for people with previous experience in computational modeling of the spine, but also a slightly more broad-ranging interests in terms of a background in mechanical engineering and things like that, which I happened to match quite well. And so there was a position, and here we are today. I think this is going to need a little bit more explanation of what I am doing within METASTRA. I'm specifically focusing more on the project management from a very scientific side of things. This is trying to knit together all the different specific research that all the different partners are doing and try to ensure that there's a good synergy between them all. That requires a very interdisciplinary approach anyway. And it's very interesting to see how in one area you have a set of ideas, and to then look at how can that at times be translated across and reused, repurposed in some way in a completely new area. That's quite an exercise in lateral thinking at times. But also a lot of the work I'm doing is to do with translation, almost. We're all speaking the same words and the same language, but that doesn't necessarily correspond to meaning the same thing. I think this project in particular has really given me an appreciation for the translation you need to do when you are working in, well, any interdisciplinary environment, not just research, but in all situations. On the interdisciplinary aspect, there is differences in ways of thinking in terms of what a specific approach should be. Obviously, there's some standard things, but very often there are differences in ideas just from the cultural background, what you learned at university compared to what someone else learned at their university, and that often differs more when you move countries. And then obviously there are all those cultural differences that you have of working in a very big consortium with partners from all over Europe, especially. And to some extent, there's a lot of, I don't want to say managing people relationships, but fostering them and making sure that just because I have one way of saying things, one way of speaking, making sure that the other person on the other side of that conversation is hearing what I mean and not what they have understood from what I said. Currently, we're here at the General Assembly. We've been doing a lot of technical discussions, and one of the things we've really been starting to understand, and I think it's something we struggled right at the start, was understanding just how long the process would be, and that at the end of the project, we might not yet be at that finalized stage of a certification, and in fact, there will be a process that continues to evolve, change, update, and be adapted as we go. As we're seeing and changing our understanding of exactly what that certification means, it's also about helping, for me and the work I'm doing, manage some of those expectations, because as an engineer, you are very excited to essentially build something and say, here, go and use it. But you can't do that. It's not necessarily going to be safe. You might think it's safe, but there are reasons. We have the protocols, procedures in place. And so there's a case of trying to manage and adapt our expectations to meet the realities of what certification will look like. But it's also, again, as an engineer, we're much more interested in building things than necessarily documenting every last step that we take. And so a lot of my work, I think, is going to start to focus more on making sure we are documenting everything in a way that isn't just suitable for an engineer, isn't just suitable for a scientist, but is suitable for the certification, even if that's going to change and even if we don't have a clear idea of what that is yet. Again, like a lot of my work is a lot of communication between the fantastic experts we have on the team from VCLS with all their knowledge and expertise on regulations and obtaining certification for medical devices, which we're a long way from, and the interests and wishes, experience and expertise on the science and engineering side that we have in all of the other members of the consortium, as well as the medical interest and expertise on the desire to get this product to patients as soon as possible. And so it's about trying to tie that communication together effectively, and especially when you've got these different expectations, to make sure there aren't clashes between them. The most obvious one would be for the clinical practice. I very much view my contribution to the project as to, again, not with my specific scientific knowledge, but rather as a scientific manager, technical project manager, to try and bring together all of these parties and help move them forward together as a cohesive group rather than individual elements to develop METASTRA DSS. And that has the obvious output in clinical practice, if we're successful, of hopefully reducing unnecessary surgeries, which is, if you're a patient, you do not want an unnecessary surgery. Equally so, ensuring that all the necessary surgeries are done, because it is inevitable in these highly complex cases that sometimes you make the judgment call that you don't do a surgery because that is what looks best. Turns out, in fact, you do need to do the surgery, and it has to be done after there's a fracture. Again, this isn't an ideal scenario, and METASTRA DSS will hopefully be reducing the numbers of cases we see like that. So that's very much how I see my impact there.